Well, hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm really excited today to have a guest on to help clarify something that my clients are constantly asking about, and that's grades and standardized testing. Does it matter? And as you know, I help families save on the cost of college. So, do grades matter? And do they help you save on the cost of college? So I've brought in an expert today, David Blobaum, to talk to us about grade inflation and standardized testing. So David, welcome so much to my channel and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Monica, for having me.
You bet.
So, I'm the director of outreach for the National Test Prep Association, and we're devoted to helping families better understand how standardized testing is used in the admissions process and also in the scholarship process as well.
Great. Well, and again, that's what my clients care about, right? Because we all want help paying for college, and scholarships are a wonderful way to do that. So let's start with the first thing of grade inflation. And
Mhm.
what exactly does it mean? And what is it doing to the admission process for students in colleges?
That's a great question that most families either never learn the depths of grade inflation or they learn it when their kids are in 11th grade, which is, unfortunately too late to really correct a lot of
Mhm.
things. So, grade inflation, which has been a rising trend, is the phenomena where teachers are awarding higher grades for less academic achievement. So, to put some numbers on that, in 1966, UCLA's Higher Education Research Institute published that it was only about 20% of students who are going on to four-year BA granting universities. Only about 20% of them had A averages in high school. So 80% didn't. But over the years, teachers have been giving out more and more A's to the point where 2 years ago, basically 60 years from the origin of the survey, it was over 80% of that segment of students who had A averages then. So only about 20% didn't have A averages then. So truly an A average has become average. And because of that, colleges really can't differentiate between top students just on grades alone. So that's why they've been turning more and more to standardized testing, which is not clear to a lot of families because they think, oh, well, test optional admissions, that means actually test scores matter less. But that actually turns out not to be the case, which we can dive into as well.
That is staggering to me that 60 years ago, only 20% of students had A average, and now 80% of students have an A average. I mean, it's so difficult. I try to have these conversations with parents, and they're like, wait, my student is getting straight A's, and yet they're failing or getting very below average on the SATs or ACTs, and and I did hear you speak about this. They're just bad test takers, right? So the standardized testing is not for them because they're great students, but the SATs or ACTs are just, they're not, their students aren't good test takers. So what really are the SATs and ACTs? What are they measuring? I mean, is it because students are bad test takers, or what's going on with that?
So you nailed it with the fact that the parents then they have 11 years of data saying that their child is a great student, right? A lot of times
Mhm.
straight A's or A averages. And then they'll take the ACT and get like an 18 on it. And they'll say, well, the ACT doesn't measure anything then. But actually, the median ACT score last year was an 18. So the average student can
Ah.
expect to get an 18 on the ACT or,
Hmm.
between 950 and 1,000 around there on the SAT. And so it's not that they're bad test takers, it's just that the grades were not as truthful about a student's academic preparedness as it could be. What the SAT and ACT are testing, and they've changed a lot over the years, and they've gotten much better at testing these things. They're testing students on the basics of rhetorical skills, like how do you make a compelling argument in your communication. They're testing students on reading and logical thinking, mathematics, data analysis. So these are all skills and knowledge that students are going to use in college and even in life. And we know that they're not just testing students on just random facts because the tests now are, at least at top colleges, more predictive than a student's high school grades. So Opportunity Insights did just recent research on all of the Ivy and Ivy Plus colleges and found that SAT and ACT scores were 3.9 times more predictive than a student's high school grades. So it's not
Wow.
like, 3%, 30%. No, this is 3.9 times more predictive. So that's why, even if a college is test optional, if it's a selective college, they really want to see test scores because grades have become so inflated.
And I mean, I'm so empathetic to families because this whole test required, test optional, test free, and test recommended, it's wildly confusing for families because I have clients who say, oh, no, the university told me that I didn't have to have a standardized test. And yet we're hearing like more and more that the tests are, well, almost 4 times more predictive of success in college. So, what's happening with the universities and why all these choices? And why aren't colleges just being honest about the fact that these tests are very predictive of success, not only in college, but also in life in general?
So the why is hard. I will say there are a few colleges that are becoming more honest. I mean, Harvard, Yale, Brown, and Dartmouth have all said on the record SAT and ACT scores are better predictors of success than our students' high school grades. So there are a couple that have been honest. But to your point, the vast majority are not honest. In my opinion, the least honest are actually the UC schools, the University of California schools, that call themselves test free. So these are
Mm.
great schools, nothing against them in general, but UCLA, UC Berkeley, they call themselves test free, but really they're just SAT, ACT free. So yes, if you send in your SAT or ACT scores, they won't look at them. But they're absolutely not test free. You basically need either AP or IB exam scores in order to get admitted to UCLA or UC Berkeley. So for instance, UCLA, this was last year, 75% of their admitted students had on an unweighted 4.0 scale, 75% had a 3.95 or above out of 4.0. So essentially, the vast majority of their admitted students had perfect or essentially perfect grades. So how can you differentiate between students who have all perfect grades? You really can't. And so
Mhm.
what Yale, to their credit, has publicly said is if we see an AP class on your transcript, we're expecting to see an AP score for that class, which is what UCLA is doing as well. They're just not publicly telling you that because the only way you can differentiate between, let's say an A at high school X in AP US history and an A at high school Y in AP US history is when you see that AP US history AP exam score. So you might have an A and get a 3, you might have an A and get a 5. Is the college going to say they're equally well prepared or that they know AP US history equally well? No, they're going to say, oh, that student who has a 5 demonstrated their knowledge on an actual standardized exam. So that's why even, the test required schools, the test optional schools, test recommended, test free, they all, as long as they're selective, that's really the differentiator between schools, not what their stated policies are, but how selective they are. If they're selective, they need to make these distinctions between top students. The only way you can reliably, accurately, and more fairly, there's no perfect answer, but more fairly determine who's more academically prepared is with standardized exams.
Gotcha. Well, with all of this confusion out there, if a family is looking at a highly selective school, is there an actual report or a place that they can go to find out, historically, what have the SAT or ACT scores been? Have they required, has the majority of their accepted students, actually taken these exams? Is there a resource that families can look at, very school specific, to see what's required and what students are actually doing to get admitted?
Great question. So the resource that I point all of my families to is the common data set. So whatever a student's college list is, I recommend that they type in that school name plus the words common data set into an internet search. And what the common data set will tell them in C9 is the percentage of enrolled students who submitted test scores. So while all schools have a preference for students with high test scores, that preference varies in strength. So for instance, Bucknell is selective, but it's not highly selective. But when you look at its common data set, last year, 89% of students enrolled at Bucknell submitted test scores. That is an astoundingly high number for a school that we think of as selective and not highly selective. So Bucknell doesn't tell you that on their website. They just say they're test optional. They don't say they recommend or expect test scores, but they're revealing their preference, their strong preference for test scores and what they do. And so that would be my recommendation to families is pay much more attention to what schools do than what they say. And so, UCLA saying, oh, we're test free, but then they accept AP exam scores. Well, you're only inviting students to send things that you want to see, that you find useful. So, unless a school truly doesn't look at any scores at all, they want scores. And then you can see how badly they want scores and what scores they want from that common data set information.
Yeah, that's such a helpful tool because again, unfortunately, we have a lot of colleges that are saying one thing but clearly doing the other. And so, when we're making choices about where to send our children to school, we want to make sure that they're as adequately prepared as possible to get into the schools that they're most interested in. David, we had talked a little earlier about this, but again, money matters and scholarships and financial aid. And so, how much weighting do schools give to merit for scholarships? Do you think that's an important piece in test taking in the getting money from the college? Does it matter?
Perfect question. So, to your point, it's not just about getting in, you also need to be able to afford it. And so,
Right.
and standardized tests can be a great tool at least some institutions for helping to do that. So, my favorite website for that is meritaidgrids.com. So, you look at that and it'll literally just show you the schools that give you automatic scholarships for certain grades and certain test scores. So some of these schools are giving students more than $100,000 over 4 years if the student had top grades, which is not that hard anymore, but also had top test scores. So these test scores can be worth tens of thousands or even $100,000 to a student. And
Right. And
Mhm.
oh, I'm sorry, David, go ahead.
Oh, and then I was just going to add that, and I mean, you're the expert on this, and you could talk more about this, which would be great. That parents really shouldn't be looking at the sticker price of colleges, especially the
Sure.
top colleges, because for those, unless you're full pay at every school, then it's might be the sticker price. But for the vast majority of students going to these top colleges, they would be on financial aid if they got into these schools. Well, the top schools tend to have the largest endowments, and they can actually typically fulfill more of that need, or first of all, meet all of that need, but two, meet that need with grants instead of loans. So it can actually end up being less expensive to go to some of these top schools if you're a financial aid student than to go to a lower ranked school that's not going to give you as much money. But again, you're not going to get into those top schools typically unless you have a high test score. So it might be through automatic merit grades. It might be through increasing your chances of getting a scholarship or increasing your chances of getting merit aid or just getting into a better school that will give you more financial aid through grants.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up because I 100% agree with you that these highly prestigious universities, they actually have more money than a public school. But you and I both know the acceptance rates at those schools are very, very low. So helping your child to differentiate themselves so that they can get into the highly selective schools then opens the floodgates to more money that they could get help with as opposed to going to a public school. So, David, I'm so grateful that you spent the time to come on and share this wildly important information with families and clarify what grade inflation is, the impact that it's having on admissions, and the importance and validity of standardized testing. I'm very grateful for your expertise. Now, why don't you go ahead and share how my watchers, listeners, viewers can get in touch with you should they need some help, in this preparation for standardized tests.
Sure. So the best resource would be to go to nationaltestprep.org. So that's the organization I'm a part of. It's the largest group of vetted experts of SAT and ACT professionals.
Awesome. Well, David, I wish you all the best. And again, thank you for your time today. We're really grateful. And for all you out there, until next time, thank you so much. Have a great day.